from that. And you can see this, right? As I do stuff here, you're seeing this live?
Yeah.
Yep.
Right on. Okay. I'll go and get started. Thanks for joining us today. So today we're going to be mostly talking about the pistol grip itself and discussing the different hand grips. In the last video, I had talked about the different ways in which we were holding it when we were actually firing it, some of the complications that we ran into. So it was just going to have more or less a kind of open discussion of, is there something better we could do with the hand grip in terms of what we're doing, or is there maybe a different way that we could maybe change the design of this slightly to make it a little bit better? And so we can talk a little bit about that and kind of just leave it as more or less an open discussion. The pistol, kind of looking at it and looking at the style of shooting for the time, it was called the bullseye style, where it's just mainly you're holding the pistol with one hand. That was really common around the late 1800s, early 1900s. You even saw that into like World War I kind of a style, where people would just mainly use one hand, point the gun forward, and just shoot that way. And it wasn't until later that, people started incorporating their second hand for more stability. And so we really see where if you try to bring in another hand, that kind of really interferes with the set trigger, because the set trigger really comes back all the way to where the fingers are. So with that, I was kind of curious on, what did other people think about that? What did other people have in terms of ideas or opinions or in terms of hand grips? And, if someone's got an idea, I can sit here and, we can try to work with that, or if it's something where we think that maybe the design should be changed or something of the sort. So for starters, I can kind of open that up to let you guys kind of pitch some of your ideas.
All right. Well, my first thought, I'm not sure how this would work in detail, but my first thought was basically just to reduce the length of the trigger pull or to change the angle of the set trigger.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was actually something that I had thought about too. So the trigger pull, a lot of that is going to be based on the internal mechanism. So in here, you've got that grooved cylinder, and as you pull the trigger, that cylinder kind of shifts back and forth, and it has a little notch where you have a piece that's kind of having it dig into those grooves, and it kind of helps turn that internal cylinder. So to change the draw of the trigger and how long that's going to take for it to come back, that's going to be a lot of like clockwork mechanism changing in here. So that's one option. But the other thing too is kind of like you said, the set trigger. If we change maybe the position of the set trigger, and correct me if I'm wrong or if I'm misunderstanding that, but if you had, say, like the set trigger wasn't going to lock as far back, say it locked further forward, so that way when the trigger's pulled, there's still room for having your hand behind that, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant.
Okay.
What about going more, instead of that type of set trigger, what about going with more of like the flintlock style set trigger, where it's still retained in the actual trigger guard and it doesn't extend out past?
Okay, so doing something of that sort. So yeah, so it's all contained here. We would lose kind of this iconic fold-down trigger, which would ultimately fundamentally change the design of that. But doing something where, the set trigger is actually still incorporated within here, and maybe you have like almost a two-stage trigger kind of a thing, where you have and more of your pure double-action pistols, right? Say your hammerless pistols or stuff of the sort like that. So kind of maybe going something more along that way, Mike, is what you're suggesting? So
hold on. I'm going to look up something on that trigger real quick for you and just shoot it over in a direct message.
While you look that up, though, so for that other suggestion of where we have the set trigger, I think that might be a good direction to kind of pursue. My only concern with that is in terms of getting your other finger up there. So I'm 6'2". I've got pretty long fingers, so like reaching that isn't too terrible of an issue for me if I were to say have this swung a little further out. But I'm also trying to think of in terms of like what is it going to be for the 95 percentile of the people that are going to be using this too, right? So if people with maybe smaller hands or stuff of the sort, are they going to be able to actually actuate this or reach this, or is it something where it's almost impractical for them to use if we do something of the sort? But maybe it's something where the design, where maybe a combination of having this lock a little further out, but then having the trigger draw be not as far and having the trigger actually start a little further back or something of the sort like that. So, your trigger would actually be starting, say, somewhere about here. So the set trigger is still easily accessible, but it's not going to come as far back. So maybe like a little bit of a combination of both of those for a shorter draw on the trigger, and then having the set trigger not come as far back. Were you able to find that, Mike? Or
yeah, so the thing that I actually found, you can see how it's got the two different triggers. On the back side of the trigger guard, there's one trigger, and then farther up, there's another trigger.
Okay, so would they do the dual trigger?
They do a dual trigger style set trigger.
So yeah, you've got the trigger in the back, which is going to set it, and then your actual firing trigger, right? But they've got, as you can see, it's almost like an elongated.
Yeah, I don't
An
know how that
elongated
would
trigger.
work with. Don't know how that would work with your setup.
But to that point, having it where, like I was saying, so if you have like your pure double action pistols, usually they'll have like a kind of a two-stage trigger where you pull it back halfway, and that's kind of like setting the internals, and then once you hit that point, you pull it back a little further, and then that's allowing it to fire. So maybe changing where instead of we have on this here, instead of having it where this triggers all the way down, it's actually kind of incorporated into both of these here. And so like you can set it there by just kind of pulling it halfway back. But then again, you still may be dealing with the really heavy trigger pull in doing so. So it'd be something where if you do that, you're still creating the issue of having like a very heavy trigger pull, which may be something where we've got that internal spring that sits about right here, doing something with maybe making that not as stiff and still seeing if we can get the mechanism to function to bring this down from 15 pounds down, maybe closer to 2 pounds or something of the sort.
Has there been any discussion about changing the actual grip itself?
So not yet, and that could definitely be something where this pistol grip definitely has more of a curved shape, so it kind of really wraps around. But if you actually look at more of your older pistols and the styles, like the pistols have it where their grip is more or less at a straighter angle, right? So if instead of having this curve around here, this was actually straighter out, we could have it where our fingers are not necessarily in the way and not as bunched up behind here, which may allow us to have enough room to be able to still use the set trigger and still get both of our hands to fit within this area. Ultimately, that would change the look of this pistol. There is something to be said and some desire to keep a pistol that is in somewhat of a design that's still very indicative of the original, right? So we're not changing it too much, just maybe updating some of the features. So we would be getting a little bit away from that, but that may ultimately be something where if we're going to have it where this trigger pull and having your hand on the pistol is going to be actually more effective, then the design of this is going to actually ultimately have to change. And let me look up. I've seen this more in flintlock pistols, so I was doing some look in this. Flintlock pistols still have some curve to them, but here, this is kind of more or less what I was thinking. So what I was thinking here, though, is your pistol, instead of having more of a curved grip, it's more straight back and it doesn't curve back around. And so with that, you would actually still have the benefits of where your hand is positioned. So like in this video here, the Lancaster pistol, I talk about how your hand is actually canted down more, right? And it actually helps out more with the recoil in comparison to, say, like more of your modern semi-auto firearms where your hand is actually more vertical. And so it actually does create kind of a bigger moment because the barrel and where the force of the action is happening is much higher above your hand. So keeping with the Lancaster pistol, where the grip is still angled more, if we just keep that angled instead of having it curve back around, you still benefit from having the barrels lower, closer to your arms, which is going to help reduce the recoil. So you still get that benefit without terribly changing the design. It's just going to go more towards maybe one of these older flintlock style where the grip is more angled out rather than being more vertical.
I think you should do like almost a Photoshop or something, or a drawing of some kind, and then post that and let us see what it looks like.
Okay. I like that idea. I can do something where I can try to Photoshop this and take this and say, well, hey, this is what I have in mind of having this further straight out. What would people think of that? How does that look? And there was different stuff that they did with the Lancaster pistol in terms of the design of the grip and stuff too earlier on. And let me see here. There was a PDF from, I think I've got the document saved. It's a documentation of going through like the ledgers and seeing all the different versions of the pistol that they had. Here we go. So as you can see here, they've done different types of pistol grips in the past, right? Even different types of set triggers and trigger guards and stuff. So I was just seeing if maybe they had one of these renditions that had the pistol grip coming further back, right? But it looks like everything still has more or less a curve to it, where it looks like this version here, or maybe this version here, actually I think this is one of the earlier ones. This version here is more or less indicative of what I've got. But yeah, I can definitely do something with Photoshop, see how this looks with this further back, if that's something that's maybe appealing, if that's something where people are like, nah, we'll just deal with the pistol grip and how it is in the hand grip, and maybe it's a little weird or funky or something of the sort, but we want to keep more of the original aesthetics of it, right? If that's something people are more interested in, and kind of put that to a vote or see what the general public think about that. But yeah, it's crazy seeing some of these. It's like 5.77 Snyder rounds, I think, is what this double-barreled one was for. So this is a really interesting pistol grip concept they've got over here. But a lot of them still have it where it's kind of angled back and still has it where, you're going to be holding it where the top of your hand is going to be somewhere right in line with the lower barrel. Except for this down here. It doesn't seem to be the case. I think they just embrace the recoil and expect that thing to go flying back. But here, there's definitely room to have your hand further up on the pistol, and definitely more of an incentive for that.
Seeing that you have these old pictures, I wonder, this is kind of a far out thought, but maybe there's some kind of documentation about how the pistol was used. I know you mentioned earlier it was common for that era to just use one-hand shooting pistols, but is there any other resource of maybe two-handing it?
And that's the thing. In terms of this pistol, I don't think there's going to be really anything specific. The only thing that we would maybe have for this pistol per se would be actually Walter Winans, the person who actually commissioned the pistol that I own. He has a couple books that are titled like The Art of Revolver Shooting. And it's actually interesting because in those books, I've tried to look through them. I've tried to look up references, digital copies of them, right? Because the books themselves are actually pretty expensive, but there's been like digital versions that I've kind of scrolled through. And there was actually no mentions of the Lancaster pistol. And I feel like if there was going to be a mention of how to use this pistol, it would have been in those books. And maybe there is in some of his books, and I just maybe haven't come across it or come across the versions of them. But in a lot of his books, you know, and even in like the cover art for it, or maybe not the cover art, but like some of the pictures, I look up, this is him over here. But there's actually a picture where he's like holding a pistol out with one hand. This was more or less the common style for how people held pistols back in the day. So I think that's really all we have to look at is what was the common techniques for that time and what did people suggest in terms of books and recommendations and different techniques for the time. But I don't think we're going to find anything specific to the Lancaster pistol because it is such a kind of a scarce firearm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If we could do something with having the set trigger canted forward, that would definitely help out. But then that runs into the issue of how far of a reach is that going to be? Is that going to be something that's practical for everyone? Is there something that could be done? You know, I do want to visit the internal mechanisms in terms of trying to improve them and what can be done with that. And when I get more deeply into those designs, I can see is there any way that I can modify it to say, you know, use different types of flat springs and stuff of the sort to reduce the amount of force that it takes to pull this trigger, or if there's something I could do to actually reduce the draw of that. And then also having this canted further back, which I think having the grip be more straight and not curve back around, but being more straight out. Well, I would say probably the easiest change to make and probably the least expensive where I'm not having to completely redesign a lot of the clockwork mechanism. Because like a lot of my intentions is to try to take what is here existing, look at that. If there's something that needs to be improved because of manufacturability or something of the sort, or hey, we could do this a little bit better, so be it. But doing stuff with like the draw and stuff of the sort and the force, other than maybe trying to change the spring or how that's going to affect it, that's going to be a lot more in-depth rather than just taking this down here and straightening it out. Because back over here, there is nothing mechanically indicative of this shape, right? I think even back here, there's really nothing. I think there's maybe a little bit of room for having the cylinder slide back and forth. But other than that, down here, you just have a spring that's hooked up. There's nothing back here, right? This is all just empty space. This is all just a little bit of aesthetics and just for the grip itself. So if we extend this or change this, this is going to be the least invasive way to change this pistol and to make it where you can get a better grip on it and to work with the trigger mechanism and everything too.
Yeah, if you think that's the easiest route, then I think maybe a good thing for the next discussion maybe would be for you to try and come up with a few different shapes and make a few pictures of those.
I'll see if I can find any more pictures of other Lancaster pistols, see what they've done, and see if there's anything that I can do to maybe make it still have it more of that iconic shape. Each one of these looks characteristically different in terms of the shape. So I'm wondering if visually it may seem different, but it may just be visually different between like what you're seeing here, right? It's not going to be ultimately in the grand scheme of things a make or break kind of a deal. I'll see what I can do. Maybe I can even take some concepts and some inspiration from some of these different variations. Like I know this is like kind of your generation 1 Lancaster pistol. This is your double barreled over here, and this one here is more or less your 3rd generation, similar to what I've got. And I can really try to come up with something that will stay a little bit true, maybe not to the design that I've got here, but something to the initial concepts that Charles W. Lancaster and Henry Thorne had come up with for this pistol. So I'll come up with some stuff and have some stuff ready and post it up, and you guys can take a look at it, and then maybe have a session where we either discuss that and say, well, what do people think? And I'll try to have something where instead of showing a video like what I'm doing today here, I'll have those different concepts out where we can sketch on them and look at them and let you guys have a little bit of input into that, or provide you guys those and let you color on them however you want.
What about more of a revolver style profile for the grip, for like the end side of it, so a little bit more meat, because obviously people are a lot bigger now than they used to be, so it might help fit the hand a little bit better. Because you'll still be able to get the arch, like the one to the very right hand side, you'll still be able to get like a decent arch going so that it would allow the set trigger. It looks like all you'd have to do is just bring the backside down flush, the palm swell, just make it a little bit more meaty so that people with bigger hands, it's not going to feel awkward. It might allow you to still grip with two hands then if you want to, after you use the set trigger.
So you're saying maybe something a little bit more like this?
So it still has the
So it has like
little
more...
hump part at the top, but it has a little bit more swell in the back.
Okay. With pistols nowadays, aside from some of your conceal and carries, but even then, people really like to have a good solid grip on their pistol. So having that where people can really get their hand on there, get a lot of contact, get their thumbs on the side, right? In my last video, I even had issues trying to get it
I can still carry this?
If you want to conceal and carry like a sir, like an old-fashioned man with a monocle and a top hat, then so be it. But I'll leave that to your discretion. I definitely see where you're coming from with that, Mike, of having more room back here, having it where it can improve the pistol grip.
I know you mentioned earlier about maybe a practical version and a more original version.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you're sure about doing, or is that just an idea?
It's just kind of an idea. I did talk a lot about, hey, well, I'm going to try for barrel liners. I'm going to try to do this and do that. There's also the aspect of, is it going to be worth the time and money to have all these different variants? I think it was you who actually mentioned it before, of wanting to see something that's still more indicative of the original. So I'm really kind of leaning more towards that of like, if I just take this design and make it where you can buy pretty much this version of the pistol, but then maybe have it where instead of having a whole bunch of like different variants of the pistol, it could just be, well, this piece right here is just a little different and you can swap this out, right? If you want to have something that's a little bit more like ergonomic and friendly for your hands, then you would have that option later on down the road. But initially it would be say, hey, let's just get something that's this version of the pistol out on the market. And then if you want to have some of these mods that we do later on, that would become available if there's more demand for it, right? Or if there's more demand, say people are more interested in saying, I like this and I want the pistol grip to be a little different. And so that way, I've got this iconic looking pistol, but it's just makes it where I can hold it a little bit better, even if it looks just maybe a little different down here in the grip. So be it. If that's what people are more after, then I might, focus more on that. At the end of the day, I've also got to think about, I want to make this because I want it, right? I think this is a very cool firearm, and I want to have a more modern version of it that I can use and be more practical with, in terms of like hunting aspects and stuff of the sort. But if this is going to be available for people to purchase, then I've still got to think about, well, if I have several different variants up there and no one's buying it, I'm almost going to be losing out on money on that, right? Long story short, it's going to come down to what do people want to see? And at the end, do people want to see a better pistol grip? Like you were saying, come up with some concepts, come up with designs. If people are liking that, so be it. And then ultimately, when it comes down to it, with those different designs, people can say, this is what we want to see for the first thing that's going to hit the market. And then afterwards, I can come up with a different variant for what is kind of more of the secondary markets. And so it's on my radar, but in terms of feasibility, it's going to come down to supply and demand, really.
Yeah, that makes sense. And me personally, I'd like it to be as original as possible, is what I'd be most interested in myself.
Right. And I think that's what a lot of other people would be interested in too, or at least find some middle ground of, this is still practical and this makes sense in terms of a modern standpoint, while still trying to retain as much originality as possible. Which is kind of why we're having this discussion. If the pistol grip doesn't make sense and it's not really effective to shoot, and by today's standards and the pistol grips that people use, and no one sits there using just one hand to shoot a pistol anymore, and maybe there's some compromise and find some sort of a middle ground between originality and practicality.
Yeah, I agree.